My name is Ryan Cooper. I'm 27 years old, and if I had opened my tent just a few seconds earlier that night, I probably wouldn't be alive to tell this story. I've been camping since I was 8 years old. My dad was the one who got me into it, and over the years I've learned just about everything there was to know about staying safe in the woods. Black bears, mountain lions, bad weather, I knew how to prepare for all of it. Because of that, I never imagined the thing I'd end up fearing most would be another person. This happened last October in Oregon. I had taken a Friday off from work because I wanted one quiet weekend away from everything. No phone calls, no emails, no traffic. Just 2 nights in the woods. After almost 4 hours of driving, I reached a primitive campsite deep inside a national forest. There weren't any marked campsites or park rangers nearby. Just an old dirt road, tall pine trees, and complete silence. That was exactly why I picked it. I set up my tent in a small clearing beside an old fire ring. There was a creek about 50 yards away, and everything looked untouched. I didn't see another car the entire drive in. The afternoon went by peacefully. I gathered firewood, cooked dinner, and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. Then something changed. It wasn't something I saw. It was something I stopped hearing. The forest became completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. It felt like the entire forest had frozen. I remember actually saying out loud, "That's weird." I tried convincing myself it was normal. Around 10:30, I climbed into my sleeping bag and turned off my lantern. I don't know how long I'd been asleep before a sound woke me. A whistle, short, soft, just one note. I opened my eyes immediately. At first I thought I had dreamed it. Then I heard it again, exactly the same. It sounded like it came from somewhere beyond the trees. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I grabbed my flashlight but kept it off. For nearly a minute there was nothing. Then 3 slow whistles, the same rhythm every time. Not random, almost intentional. I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The fire had almost burned out. The moonlight barely reached beyond the clearing. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the trees. Nothing, no movement. No glowing animal eyes, nothing. I felt stupid for getting nervous. I zipped the tent shut and lay back down. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, crunch. Crunch, crunch, dry leaves under heavy boots. They weren't circling the campsite, they were walking directly toward me. Every step came closer until they stopped only a few feet outside my tent. I held my breath. Whoever it was didn't speak. Didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. For what felt like forever, there was only silence between us. Then, a quiet whistle right outside the fabric of my tent. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside had to hear it. I reached for my phone out of instinct before remembering there was no signal. I grabbed the bear spray beside my sleeping bag instead. 5 minutes passed, nothing, no footsteps, no whistle, no sound at all. I finally convinced myself the person had left. Then a voice spoke, calm, quiet, almost friendly. "Hey." I froze. "I know you're awake." Every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't answer. The voice came again. "You don't have to hide." It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. That somehow made it even worse. Normal people don't walk up to a stranger's tent after midnight in the middle of nowhere. I stayed completely silent. Almost another minute passed, then the person laughed. Just once, a low, quiet laugh. After that, the footsteps slowly walked away. I waited another 20 minutes before I finally looked outside. The campsite was empty. I searched with my flashlight as far as I could see. Nothing. I barely slept the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I started packing. While rolling up my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were muddy boot prints all around the tent. Not just one set. Several. Whoever had been outside hadn't simply walked up once. They had circled my tent again and again and again. I counted at least for complete circles before the tracks disappeared into the trees. I packed everything into my truck in record time. As I started driving back toward the main road, I kept checking my mirrors. About 15 minutes later, I noticed an old green pickup truck parked on the side of the dirt road. It hadn't been there the day before. There was a man standing beside it. He wasn't waving. He wasn't asking for help. He was just watching the road, watching me. As I drove past him, he smiled, not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that makes you wonder how long he'd been waiting. I never stopped. When I finally reached an area with phone service, I called the ranger station to report what had happened. The ranger asked me one question. "Did you hear whistling?" I said yes. There was a long silence before he answered. "We've had several reports like that over the past few years." "You're lucky you stayed inside your tent." I asked him what he meant. He simply said they had never identified the person responsible. I haven't gone camping alone since, and if I ever hear someone whistling outside my tent again, I'm leaving before the sun goes down. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and I didn't realize someone was using my own truck to lure me out of my tent until it was almost too late. I've lived in Washington my entire life, and camping has always been one of my favorite things to do. My father taught me how to fish before I was even 10 years old, and by the time I was a teenager, I was taking solo camping trips every fall. I knew how to stay safe in the woods. I always checked the weather, stored my food properly, and never ignored common sense. That's why what happened to me still doesn't make any sense. This happened in late October, about 3 years ago. I drove nearly 4 hours to a small lake inside a national forest. It wasn't a popular place, especially that late in the season. The campground was almost empty, which was exactly what I wanted. When I pulled into the parking area, I noticed only one other vehicle. It was an old red pickup truck parked near the edge of the lot. There was no one around it. I assumed the owner was out hiking or hunting. I grabbed my gear, walked about a quarter mile to a clearing near the lake, and set up my tent. The afternoon was perfect. I spent a few hours fishing, cooked dinner over a small campfire, and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. By 10 o'clock, the temperature had dropped below freezing. I climbed into my sleeping bag, turned off my lantern, and fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up to the sound of my truck beep, just one short chirp. The sound was unmistakable. It was the same noise my truck made whenever I locked or unlocked it with the key fob. I reached for my watch. 1:43 a.m. I frowned. Maybe I'd accidentally pressed the button while I was sleeping. It seemed possible. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. About 2 minutes later, beep, the exact same sound. Now I was annoyed. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and looked toward the parking area. My truck was barely visible through the trees. Nothing moved, no headlights, no people, no animals. Everything looked completely normal. I pressed the lock button on my key fob. My truck flashed its lights once. Problem solved, or so I thought. I climbed back inside my tent, zipped it shut, and lay down again. I couldn't have been there more than 15 minutes before it happened again. Beep. This time I sighed, grabbed my boots, and stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately. I walked halfway toward the parking area before stopping. Something didn't feel right. The forest was completely silent, no wind. No insects, nothing. I turned around to head back to my campsite. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The zipper on my tent was halfway open. I knew I had closed it. I was absolutely certain. For a few seconds I just stood there staring at it. Maybe I hadn't pulled it all the way. Maybe I was just tired. That's what I kept telling myself. I walked back, zipped it completely shut again, and checked both sides before getting back inside. I don't know how long I sat there listening. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then, I heard footsteps, not running, not sneaking, just slow, steady, circling my tent, one full circle, then another. Each step sounded deliberate, as if the person wanted me to know they were there. I reached for the bear spray beside my sleeping bag. The footsteps stopped directly behind the tent, then a man's voice quietly said, "Wrong one." My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and if my cousin hadn't grabbed my arm when I reached for the tent zipper that night, I honestly don't think I'd be here telling this story. I've lived in Colorado my entire life, so camping was something I grew up doing. My parents took me on weekend trips almost every summer, and even after moving into my own apartment, I still tried to get out into the mountains whenever I had a few days off. I've never been the type of person to scare easily. Every strange noise always had a logical explanation until this happened. Last September, my cousin Sarah and I planned a 2-night camping trip about 3 hours from Denver. We picked a small campground near a lake because online reviews described it as quiet and peaceful. There were only a handful of campsites, and by the time we arrived Friday afternoon, only a few were occupied. Everything about the place felt normal. We spent the afternoon hiking around the lake, taking pictures and joking about how nice it was to finally be away from work. After dinner, we sat by the fire talking until it started getting cold. Around 10 o'clock, we put out the fire, locked our food in the car, and climbed into our tent. I remember checking my phone one last time before realizing I had no signal. It didn't bother me. At the time, that actually felt relaxing. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard footsteps. At first, I assumed someone was walking to the campground restroom. The footsteps were slow, crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped beside our tent. I waited for them to continue. They didn't. Whoever it was just stood there. I whispered Sarah's name. "Are you awake?" She answered almost immediately. "I hear it too." Neither of us moved. After nearly a minute, the footsteps slowly walked away. Sarah quietly laughed and whispered, "That was weird." I laughed too, mostly because I was trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. A few minutes later, we both drifted back to sleep. I don't know how much time had passed before another sound woke me. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was the soft sound of someone dragging one of our camping chairs across the dirt. The sound lasted only a couple of seconds. Then it stopped. Sarah looked at me in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. Neither of us wanted to unzip the tent. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, another noise came from outside. This time it sounded like someone slowly unzipping a backpack. Except our backpacks were locked inside the car. I carefully pulled back one corner of the tent window just enough to peek outside. The flashlight beam wasn't on. The moon gave off just enough light for me to make out the campsite. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed one of our folding chairs. It wasn't where we'd left it. It was sitting only a few feet away from the tent, facing directly toward us. Someone had moved it. I quietly pointed it out to Sarah. She whispered, "I swear it wasn't there." Before I could answer, another chair scraped across the ground. Except no one was touching it, at least no one I could see. The sound came from just beyond the edge of the trees. We both froze. A few seconds later, a man's voice broke the silence, soft, calm, almost polite. "Excuse me." Neither of us answered. "I'm looking for my campsite." The voice sounded close. To close, Sarah mouthed the words, "Don't answer." I nodded. The man spoke again. "I think I'm lost." Something about his tone didn't feel right. If someone was really lost, why wasn't he using a flashlight? Why was he wandering through campsites after 2 in the morning, and why had he moved our chairs? Nearly a minute passed without either of us saying anything. Then, the voice changed. It became slightly louder. "I know you're awake." My heart started racing. I hadn't made a sound. Neither had Sarah. The man chuckled quietly. "I can wait." Neither of us slept for the rest of the night. Every few minutes we'd hear footsteps circling the campsite. Sometimes they were close, sometimes farther away. Once they stopped directly behind the tent, then everything went silent again. Just before sunrise, I heard a car engine start somewhere down the road. The footsteps stopped immediately. A few seconds later, whoever had been outside walked away through the trees. We waited until daylight before leaving the tent. The first thing I noticed was that every single one of our camping chairs had been moved into a perfect circle around the tent. Our cooler had been placed in front of the entrance. Nothing had been stolen, nothing was broken. It looked like someone had simply wanted us to know they'd been there. We packed as fast as we could. On the way out, we stopped at the campground office and told the ranger everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. "Did either of you answer him?" I said no. The ranger let out a slow breath. "Good." I asked if he'd heard stories like ours before. He nodded. "A few." Then he looked out the window toward the campground before speaking again. "Whoever it is, they always try to get people to respond." I asked if they'd ever caught the man. He shook his head. "They never stay long enough." As Sarah and I walked back to the car, the ranger called out one last thing. "If someone talks to you outside your tent after midnight," he paused, "pretend you're asleep." I still think about that trip sometimes. Not because of the voice, not because of the chairs, but because of something Sarah told me on the drive home. She admitted that while I was looking through the tent window. She had looked through the opposite side. She said she saw someone standing between the trees, completely still, watching us. The strange part, she could only see him when she wasn't looking directly at him. Every time she focused on where he was standing, he was gone. Neither of us has gone camping since, and if I ever hear a stranger politely asking for help outside my tent in the middle of the night, I'm staying silent until the sun comes up.